So welcome everybody to today's early intervention echo. We're thrilled to have you join us. If you've not taken a minute, please put your name and contact information into chat. It just, again, helps build up that community of practice, getting to know who's on the call. As you heard or saw, we are recording today's session. We use it for educational and quality improvement purposes. It is stored on our Canvas page as well as our YouTube channel. So by participating in this session, you're consenting to be recorded. Echo is an interactive community, so please ask your questions. Turn on your camera if you feel comfortable in doing that. We just want to make sure that we're learning the information and sharing. There's a lot of amazing people on this call, so sharing all of our knowledge with each other. It's a great way to get to know each other. We do talk about some sensitive topics, so please remember to always de-identify. Don't use first, last names. Don't share things that we wouldn't want to be shared of ourselves. If you have any questions about de-identifying, please reach out to one of our amazing hub members. They all have or will now have an asterisk in front of their name so that you can find them easy in chat and on the call. If you've never joined an echo session before, welcome to your first one. They are a great way to get information out and learn some valuable professional development. We always will have a didactic speaker, and then we have a case presentation. So a case presentation is a great way to learn about a case that we're all struggling with, get useful information. We do small breakouts, talking about the case, providing resources, learning from all of our amazing colleagues on this call. So don't jump off right at the hour, because that case presentation is a great way to learn a little bit more. And then the other component is just really knowing other colleagues out there that are doing the exact same thing that we are. If you'll take a minute and just rename your profile, where you're from, what your discipline is, it again just builds that virtual connection with each other on it. Zoom, we all probably know how to raise our hand, come off mute, but just in case we don't, here is how we do that. We send out a credit of attendance or a certificate after you complete the survey and after the session. So please, we'll be dropping in the survey link throughout today's session. Please take a minute and fill that out. I also sent one out that is going along with our 4-part series on social communication. That is through REDCap and the University of Utah. So please also take a minute to fill that out. Those surveys, while they're a pain for us to fill out, they give us valuable information and also keep things free so we can go back to our vendors or our grants and say, this is the amount of people that we reached by doing some of these things. We do store everything on a Canvas page, so if you do not have access to our Canvas page, you can email earlyecho@usu.edu and we will grant you access. Case studies, well, we talk about certain things on our didactic session. The case study does not have to go along with the topic. If you are struggling with a case on a family that might have cerebral palsy, it doesn't mean that we need to match social communication. We just want cases to be able to talk about. So while it's helpful to have the same kind of category, it doesn't have to be. And it's really just a great way, like I continue to say, to get information from all these amazing colleagues on the call. Right now we have about 45 participants, and each one of those participants probably has some useful information or a tidbit that works with a family that we have probably not thought about. And so it's a great way to just have those discussions. We do have social media where we share useful information that comes through our network or information about upcoming sessions. So if you've not followed us, take a minute to follow us on social media. And then just want to say thank you for attending today's session. I am thrilled to just introduce and announce this amazing group from the University of Utah who is going to be talking with us for the next 4 months on social communication. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Stacy, and she can take it away.
Great, thank you. Okay. Thanks, Janelle, for having us. We are a group of collaborators from the University of Utah, as Janelle said, and we're happy to be talking about the what, the when, the why, and the how of social communication in this 4-part series. So my name is Stacy Manwaring, and I'm a speech language pathologist and have worked in early intervention and with kids birth to 3, doing clinical research for a pretty good handful of years now. And the rest of our team, I believe everyone is on here as well. Jory Harris, who is an SLP in the Department of Pediatrics here at the U, and Sarah Houghton, who is finishing up her clinical fellowship to become an SLP, and is also a doctoral candidate here at the U. And then Ashley Stewart, who I know that at least some of you have heard from before on this platform, and she's a psychologist. And we enjoy working together and talking about early social communication, development, assessment, and intervention. And Janelle mentioned this survey, and I saw that Ashley put a link to it in the chat. This is a survey where we are looking for your input on, as a clinician practitioner, how you what your practice is like when it comes to social communication. And we would like to be able to use this information that you give us in this survey to help tailor what we focus on in the following sessions that we have with you over the next few months. So it's a pretty short survey, should not take more than 10 minutes or so of your time, and would very much appreciate getting your feedback there. So in today's session, I will be doing today's session, and my job is to introduce the what, when, why, and how of social communication. And then in sessions 2, 3, and 4, we will be building on the foundation that we laid today, and we'll be diving in following sessions to more practical strategies for assessment. And then we'll spend the last couple sessions talking about intervention. And today we are going to take us back to what do we know about what is social communication? When does social communication begin developing? We want to be able to talk about what are milestone tools that families can use to track their children's social communication, and then starting a beginning introduction to the why. Why does this matter? Why does it matter that we know about, talk about, assess, and treat social communication? We have a few videos that we will be showing you today, and these are videos of young children and their families who have participated in our research. And we want you to know that we have the permission from the caregivers to show you these videos for educational purposes. We do not have permission to for them to be recorded, and spread. So would just ask that you would help us maintain these families' confidentiality.
I'm just going to jump in there, Stacy. So when we edit our video for today, we will be splicing out the videos. So if you go back and watch those and all of a sudden you don't see the video, that will be the reason why.
Thank you. Thanks, Janelle. As we start to reflect on the what of social communication, we wanted to start by just putting out the general question, what is social communication to you? When you hear this term, early social communication, pre-linguistic social communication, what do you think of? You're welcome to put ideas in the chat. You are also welcome to unmute and tell us out loud. So interacting with another person, joint attention, back and forth, exchanges. Yeah, turn taking, joint referencing to something, to an idea, a topic. Yeah, these are all important gestures. Love it. These are all important aspects of social communication and really do get at the idea that it is about the interchange. We know that we can think about social communication in terms of a couple different dimensions, which you already started to mention in your ideas about what is social communication. We can think about communication both in terms of the form of communication which is the behavior that the child is using to communicate. So someone put gestures in the chat. That's one example of a form of communication. It's a behavior. We can see it, observe it. Communicative behaviors can also be described by their function, and that is the purpose or the reason of the communicative behavior. So to stick with the example of a gesture, a child can use a gesture like pointing, and they can point for different functions. It might be because they want something or because they want you to notice something. So it's helpful to think about early social communication, both in terms of the form and in terms of the function. And we'll talk about each of these dimensions, starting with the form. So in typical development, we know that kids are pretty social by the end of the first year of life, and they are using a variety of pre-linguistic forms to communicate and to interact with other people. Forms like shared or joint attention, that was mentioned in the chat. They're using what we might call communicative non-word vocalizations. So not words yet, but vocalizations that are used to communicate with another person. They may be directed with a gesture or with eye contact with a communicative partner. Kids are also using a range of gestures and facial expressions. And importantly, they also are integrating these different forms of communication. And this integration with, say, a gesture and eye gaze or facial expression is important to help bring about a shared mental state where the partners in the interaction focus their attention on the same object, the same event that is being communicated about. So while a caregiver might be engaged in doing their own thing, right? It might be the dishes, or it might be cleaning up the toys or making a meal. And if the infant is silently pointing to something, a cookie or a cat, then it's a lot easier to miss that point than when that gesture starts to be accompanied by something like a vocalization. where then it's easier to share, to shift attention and to share attention on that object of interest. So for a minute, we'll talk about these different forms of communication, starting with shared attention. So there is a developmental sequence that happens with sharing attention. And as we talk today, we're going to be using both the term shared attention and joint attention. And these terms are have been used in a lot of different ways in the literature. So we'll spend just a couple minutes kind of getting on the same page about how we are talking about these terms. By shared attention, we can think about coordinating attention between something, an object, an event, and a person for a social or a communicative purpose, where both communicative partners are aware of or have that shared mental state that attention is being shared. And there's a developmental sequence of sharing attention. First, where the adult looks at what the child is looking at. And then the child begins to follow the adult's attention. And third, the child then checking in with the adult to see if the adult is watching. And we'll talk about the when of development for this developmental sequence of shared attention. Another term that we commonly hear and use is the term joint attention. And joint attention involves this shared attention between at least two people. And there are a couple different types of joint attention that we want to differentiate. One is responding to joint attention. And this is more of the receptive form of joint attention that involves a child following the direction of attention of another person. So the caregiver might shift their gaze and point toward an object across the room or a dog across the park. And the child responding to that joint attention by turning and looking at what the parent is pointing to and looking at is responding to joint attention. The other term we hear or see for responding to joint attention is gaze following or gaze point following. It's the same thing as responding to joint attention. And then the other type of joint attention is initiating joint attention. And this is the ability to spontaneously seek to direct the attention of another person through eye contact or a gesture and or a vocalization to share interest or experience on an object or event. So this is where the child is pointing to a dog and looking between a caregiver and the dog as if to say, look, do you see what I see? Importantly, in the literature, there has been shown to be a strong positive relationship between the frequency of joint attention, both receptive and initiating, responding to and initiating joint attention, and the development of language and cognition. So young children who more frequently communicate by coordinating their attention with a communicative partner on an object or an event have better language outcomes than children who display fewer acts of joint attention. We also know that joint attention can be improved with early intervention, that we can target these early joint attention skills, and that improvements in joint attention have collateral benefits on language and cognition and social development. So another form, talking about communication forms, another form of early communication is communicative and non-word vocalizations, which are vocalizations that are produced by a child that are accompanied by a gesture or eye contact and shared with a communicative partner, but they're not yet words. We also know that several aspects of vocalizations have been found to positively correlate with language. And one of these is the rate with which children vocalize interactively, produce interactive vocalizations. Another communicative form, pre-linguistic communicative form, is gesture. And in thinking about gesture development, first we need to think about, well, what do we even mean by gesture? And gestures are actions that are produced with the intent to communicate, typically using fingers, hands, and arms. There are two main types of early developing gestures that we'll summarize here. Deictic gestures are gestures that are used to establish reference, to indicate, or to call attention to an object or an event. So this would be something like a point gesture, or a give, or a show, or a reach. And these gestures, again, they can be used to indicate or call attention to anything. Representational gestures are gestures that are used also to establish reference, but they also carry some fixed semantic content. So something like shaking the head for no, or waving for hi and bye, clapping, putting a finger to a mouth to indicate shh. These gestures can be conventional gestures. The examples that I've just given are primarily conventional gestures. We have shared meaning. When someone shakes their head, we could all agree that that would indicate no. Another type of representational gesture would be object-related gestures. So these are still empty-handed, but they're representing some kind of an object. So a cupped hand to the mouth to indicate drinking, or moving your arm and hand through the air to indicate, to represent airplane. So deictic gestures point out or indicate a referent, and representational gestures stand for a referent. Numerous studies have reported on the relationship of gesture development and its association with language outcomes. Deictic gestures in particular may play a unique role in the development of language. And we can think about this in terms of thinking about how gestures are giving kids a way to refer to objects or to events before they have the spoken language to be able to refer to those things. And so then caregivers are provided with an opportunity to contingently respond to the infant's gesture and to translate that gesture into words. And these bidirectional influences between caregivers and their children really help to scaffold the development of language. So we've talked about communication forms, the first dimension. And now let's talk for a moment about communication functions or purposes or intentions. So for any of the communicative forms that we talked about, children can use a form or coordinate forms to communicate for a variety of functions. And we consistently see that by the end of the first year of life, children are being able to express or communicate a variety of intentions. We can categorize these communicative functions or intentions into three main categories: behavior regulation, social interaction, and joint attention. Where behavior regulation is aimed at regulating another person's behavior, either to request or to protest. Social interaction is more about the child drawing attention to self, showing off, or requesting a social game that includes some interaction. Greetings, waving, hi and bye, for example, would be examples of social interaction. And then joint attention. Remember the two types of joint attention that we talked about: responding to joint attention and initiating joint attention. This joint attention right here, we're talking about initiating joint attention, where the child is trying to draw another person's attention to an object or an event to comment on that thing. So to think about combining the what that we've just talked about with the when of social communication, we can think about a little moving us ahead a little. We can think about the why. Why does all of this matter? Why is early pre-linguistic social communication so important? And one reason is that these early pre-linguistic social communication skills help move children toward spoken language. And as clinicians, as professionals, we want this, right? We know that it's a priority for families. I'd like my child to talk, to say words. And so then we have to step back and ask ourselves, okay, how do we get there? How do we get the child from pre-intentional or early intentional communication to using spoken words? And there are steps to getting a child there. And that's what this ladder is meant to represent. This includes building the foundational pre-linguistic social communication skills that support the development of intentional communication and eventually language, spoken language. We can't just jump right into teaching kids or expecting that kids will use words and talk. There is a developmental sequence. So considering this developmental sequence of early social communication is important in understanding what is helpful and even necessary in getting kids to using language meaningfully and functionally. And this developmental sequence of communication starts at birth with what has been called the perlocutionary stage, pre-intentional. So this is where the child may have an effect on their communicative partner, but it's without intention to do so. So a child's communication is not goal-directed. However, at this stage, adults infer intention, and that's really important. So the infant smiles or coos, and the caregiver says, "Oh, you're full," or "You're happy." So during the first several months of life, up to 6, 7 months of age, infants can and do communicate, but they are not doing so intentionally. They don't intend or plan to communicate, but the adult is inferring intention. And this is important for helping the child even get on the ladder to move toward spoken language. The next stage is the illocutionary stage of communication development. And this is where intentionality comes online. And it emerges somewhere around 7 to 9 months of age, when the infant learns to communicate intentions more clearly and effectively. They become purposeful communicators. Now they're considering their audience, and they're communicating intentions through pre-linguistic means. So what we talked about with the different forms of communication, gestures, communicative non-word vocalizations, and they're beginning to coordinate these means of communication. And they begin to use these means for a variety of communicative functions or purposes. And then children begin to use words. as they approach their first birthday. There's nothing magical about the first birthday and using words, we know, and there is a range. But in the locutionary stage, that's where kids become symbolic and use words as reference. We want to focus our time on this illocutionary stage of communication development, thinking about the forms and functions that are developing during this time. There are building blocks to getting a child from pre-intentional communication to intentional communication and eventually using words. And we can think about these building blocks as being rungs on the ladder. So while families may want their child to talk as their main goal, we know it's critical to build the foundational skills to support the development of language. So the blocks shown here represent the aspects of infant development and also infant caregiver interactions that are critical foundations to communication and ultimately to language development. The first is building block that we might think about as shared or joint attention, which we previously talked about. And this is a skill. Sharing attention starts to unfold early in development and then really expands during the intentional communication stage. And I want to show you some images that illustrate the developmental sequence of sharing attention, which unfolds between is mastered between 6 and 9 months of age. So this is how it starts. The adult is sharing attention with the child's focus of attention, looking at what the child is looking at. And then the child learns to follow the adult's attention. This is what we talked about with responding to joint attention. And then here we see that the child checks in with the adult to see if the adult is watching. This is the beginning of what is initiating joint attention, where the child is shifting their gaze from an object or an event up to the adult. And then children start to coordinate this joint shared attention with shared positive affect in order to communicate. So the sharing of affect then is another skill, another communicative form or means that we've talked about that's important during the intentional communication stage. And as children reach 6 to 9 months, they direct their emotion, both positive and negative emotion, by looking at their caregiver. And here are some examples of clear shared affect. And sharing attention and affect help a child step toward sharing intentions. And this includes that ability to be able to communicate with others to achieve a specific goal. And to do this, children need to be able to coordinate sounds, gestures, other behaviors with shared attention and shared affect. And children with delays usually follow the same developmental stages that we see in typical development. Here are a few examples of sharing intentions that involve the use of gestures. So the earliest communicative gestures appear between about 7 and 9 months of age, and they're one of the first consistent indicators of intentionality. Here the child is giving. Reaching is another early developing gesture. Moving away from. So children are able to also, you notice affect here, the combining of affect with this move toward mom to request comfort. Showing. Pointing develops. And representational gestures. Usually representational gestures are seen after the emergence of a number of deictic gestures. And conventional gestures like clapping, waving, shaking the head for no tend to come before the object-related gestures that we talked about. So we've talked about the what and the when of social communication. We would like to have a conversation for a minute or two about what resources you have for talking with caregivers about social communication milestones, the what and the when. So if you would like to put in the chat or unmute, we'd love to hear what resources you are already aware of that can be shared with caregivers to teach about social communication milestones. The social communication checklist. Janelle, do you mind unmuting and just saying a word or two about the kinds of things that are on the social communication checklist?
Yeah, so the social communication checklists are through Florida University through the Autism Navigator program, and they have social communication growth checklists, and it talks about some of all of those important ones, just like we do developmental milestones. It has ones that happen with social communication. And then the other one that I use a lot is the social communication checklist through Project Impact that talks about the form and function and behavior of communication.
Awesome. Those are great resources. The first one that Janelle is referencing is this one.
Look
So
at, I
we love
know
this.
what I'm talking
I
about.
You do.
Hooray!
We we love this one. So there is the Autism Navigator for professionals, and families can also go there. There's also what's called the Baby Navigator. The Baby Navigator is specifically for families. You can share this resource with your families, and they can go in and they can sign up, and you don't have to sign up to get access to the growth charts, but you can sign up to get access to more information about the your own child's development. But this is a resource that is meant specifically for families, not even for professionals. It's really helpful to us as professionals to review social communication milestones, but they basically go in 2-month intervals between 1 and 24 months across a variety of domains. Here's an example. So this is the milestone chart for 3 to 4 months and also for 11 to 12 months. Families can access these. You can download these and share them with families. So this is a great resource. Another one is the CDC milestone tracking app for families. And if you haven't checked this out, give it a go. It allows families to track children's milestones from 2 months of age to 5 years. And it covers more than just social communication and language, things like motor and cognitive as well. But this is another great resource. So we think a lot about milestones. We talk a lot about milestones, and sometimes we want to have parent-friendly information and or caregiver friendly, and so these are just a couple of resources, and it's awesome to hear that that you already know about them.
And Stacy, as being the ambassador to the state of Utah for Learn the Signs, I'm thrilled that you're sharing that. There's tons of great resources within that. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. So in our last minute or two, we'll just finish up by a preview of the beginning of session 2 and revisiting the why behind social communication. And then this is where we'll pick up next month. So the early social communication skills that we've talked about today are important precursors to language. They act as stepping stools or as rungs on a ladder in moving toward spoken language. And it makes it really tough to climb up a ladder that is missing rungs, near impossible. And so thinking about designing and implementing interventions that include a focus on increasing a child's social communication skills can help to be able to fill these gaps or missing rungs and ultimately help result in improved language use and better long-term language and communication outcomes. As we prepare for session 2, the beginning of April, we will revisit the why and start diving into the how regarding assessment. How do we assess, think about assessing pre-linguistic, pre-verbal communication? And as we prepare for our next session, we wanted to end by asking you, what measures do you use to assess pre-linguistic, pre-verbal social communication? What measures does your program use? And if you wouldn't mind taking a second to put some of these in the chat, this will help give us some information to build our session for next month. And one last plug reminder to click on the link that you received in your email or that is in our handout from today's session to complete the survey. That will also help us to tailor what we focus on in the next few sessions. Thank you so very much for having us here today and for interacting with us. And we're happy to take any thoughts, questions as you move into the case presentation.
Thank you, Stacy. That was so useful and informative. I'm going to open it up for just 1 minute if there is anybody who has a question. Okay. Well, don't everybody jump off, because this is the other amazing part of an echo, is having a case presentation. So I am going to ask Carla to unmute herself. I'm going to share her slides for us. And she will get started on our case.
Hey, Janelle, just real
Yes.
quick, for those who aren't watching the chat, there's a lot of great resources that people are using as assessments in the chat to Stacy's final question there. So if you had any questions about different resources you could use as far as evaluations or assessments, there's quite a few that people put into the chat.
Great. Thank you. All right, Carla, come unmute and
Yes.
start talking about your amazing case.
Hi, well, thank you so much again for the opportunity to let me present a little bit about my case. Just to present myself, my name is Carla Montoya. I am a child development specialist in training, and I'm also the social service coordinator for DDI Vantage, the early intervention program. We serve, or at least I serve, the Salt Lake Valley, the northern part, and we also have offices in Duchesne and Tooele County. So you can put the next slide. So about our services, we provide services at home, and we usually go twice a month, depending on the child's need. But that's usually the type of services we provide. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit about a case that I had that I've been struggling a little bit. Again, I understand that I'm new, and the information shared today, I think it will be really relevant to this case. So we'll see what we can say. So I have a child that is 35 months old, and he's a male. He is currently not talking, rarely makes eye contact. He loves spinning and likes a lot of visual stimulation. A little bit about the family culture. They're Hispanic, the family's from Peru. And sorry. And I do believe that the parents are actually from an indigenous community from Peru. It is my understanding that there is a low educational level from the parents. This child is the youngest of four. The child has a niece that is about 6 months younger than he. And the parents compare both children a lot. They usually said, oh, my granddaughter does this, but my child is unable to do this. Parents do not believe in autism. I mean, it's taking a long time for me to kind of educate them, but they still, it's really hard to have conversations about mental health and what it is. One of the things that they mentioned when we started the services is that they wanted to have a surgery for the child to talk. I didn't necessarily understand what type of surgery they wanted to, but they want the child to talk. Parenting can be hard in terms of some of the behaviors that the child has, and both parents have different ways to parent the child. They usually, so the parents have opposite schedules. So one stays with the child in the morning and the other one stays with the child in the afternoon. And because of the schedule, culture, and how the child behaves, most of the time they resort for him to watch TV or for him to go outside to get the energy out. One of the things that I found really interesting is that when the child is watching the TV, he usually watches videos for between 5 to 30 seconds, and he's asking for the video to change. Like there is, like, you cannot have him sit long, and yeah, it can be a little bit complicated to do that. Yeah, you can go on the next slide. Yeah, so parents would like for him to use verbal language. For them, it's really, really hard to understand what they want, what he wants. And although they communicate by gestures, sometimes parents have a hard time understanding what the child wants. Like if the child wants to eat something, he will go to the fridge and points at the fridge so they can open the fridge, but they don't know specifically from the fridge what he wants. Sometimes they just have an appointment. Sorry. So they usually, yeah. Sometimes he has some tantrums. And another thing that mom has mentioned in the past too, the child has a hard time falling asleep. He will jump and jump for hours before falling asleep. Mom co-sleeps with him, but mom most of the time cannot get a full night of sleep. So it's kind of hard because of the energy that this child has. And so I guess some of the goals that the parents have is to increase the verbal communication and having a full night's sleep, or at least having at least 8 hours, and they have consistent sleep. I do know that there is a lot of sensory needs that this child has. Again, parents have a hard time understanding or believing what autism is. And I know that some of the issues that we also experience is understanding how their insurance work. Sometimes, I mean, I had a hard time understanding the type of insurance that they have, so we can get a diagnosis and the type of services, at least in the state of Utah or in the Salt Lake Valley. Next slide, please. Additional information, the child has a hard time interacting with other individuals. He tries to avoid unknown adults. Sometimes or at least we've noticed, or parents have disclosed that the child is starting to open up to unknown children. But again, some of the other barriers that we experience is that it's hard for parents to implement the strategies that we provide as a team. Although this child has a good attachment with one of the older sisters, and they kind of spend time together. So yeah, I guess my question says a little bit about what community resources are out there. How can we continue to educate parents about autism and how to help parents follow through treatment? How is there like anyone that can also help us understand a little bit about their insurance or sit down with them a little bit more so they can understand and they don't incur in debt? I don't know if anyone has any questions or any concerns at the moment, but that's where I am.
Carla, is he going to be transitioning to preschool services when he turns 3?
I am educating the family to do so, though I don't know if they will follow through.
Okay. We are going to be going into small breakout groups. We will be moving Carla through the breakout groups. So whenever you see my face come on, hub members, know that if she's in your breakout group, I'm sneaking her away. So the first one is community resources, and we're going to have 2 groups on that. So Kurt and Heather, you are in a group for community resources together, and then Kirsten, your group is also covering community resources. We're going to have 2 groups on how to educate parents about autism. In one group, Pat, you will be the hub member, and Rebecca will be another group hub member. And then Shelby and Kate, you will be in a group together to talk about strategies to help parents. So again, please continue to have those great discussions in your breakout groups, and we will be moving Carla through those. So Shayna, if you want to open up the breakout groups. You should all see a notification to join a breakout group. Do we have everybody back, Shayna? Okay, well, we are short on time, so I'm not going to go through everybody's groups. Just so everybody is aware, all of the resources are stored within our Canvas page. So if you ever want to go back and get some of the amazing resources that were shared within your group or anybody else's group, check those out on Canvas. Carla, we will send you a compiled list of all those resources. So if each of the breakout groups will email their notes to Kate, we'll compile those. Again, our next session is also going to be on social communication, which will be April 3rd. So hopefully springtime weather more than today. So thank you all. Enjoy your day, and we will talk to you soon.